V11 Chapter 4. Chapter 4. A Craftsman and Negotiation. Image. The two summoned Death Knights vanished from the other side of the gates. They roared in anticipation of joyful slaughter, while the cries of the dying rang out. Once the gates slowly closed, the thickness of the double doors meant that the sounds of carnage on the other side did little more than tickle the eardrums. Things should be alright for now. There was a time limit on Death Knights that were not made with corpses. Even so, if the estimates of Quagga combat power from their captives was accurate, they should be able to defeat a sizable portion of the attackers even without knowing their opponent's numbers. If the enemy was not incompetent, they would surely pull back to regroup after taking sufficient losses. I hope they don't retreat just yet. If they build a camp, it'll mean the danger is still clear and present. That way, the Dwarven nation will have to work with us. I should order the Death Knights to hold back for now. It's quite troublesome when you can't win by too large a margin. As Ains contemplated these details in silence, he glanced to the Commander-in-Chief, who was looking at him with a twitching smile on his face. Ains had no idea why he had that smile born of terror on his face, and in that moment an imaginary light bulb shone above Ains' head. He should have become used to my appearance by now, so it's probably because of the Quagga screaming outside. Well, it's true that the wails of the dying can be somewhat disturbing. That said, Ains felt that he should not mind the screaming of the enemy so much. Still, he would not be human nor a dwarf, rather if he did not think that way. But how can someone like that be a commander of warriors? This is somewhat worrying. He knew he was thinking too much about this, but Ains continued looking at the Commander-in-Chief. At this moment, Gondo approached him. Then, Your Majesty, I shall be returning home for a bit. Ah. Then, will you help me settle things on your end? Of course. I will arrange for it and send it out. It's alright if the time or whatever isn't adjusted, right? I can count on your spells if something happens, right? Ains extended a fist and bumped it against Gondo's. They had talked about many things before coming here, and it would seem it had been effective. Gondo really does talk a lot. He tended to monopolize the conversation, and he spoke at such lengths that it seemed never-ending. This must have been the result of being obsessed about the almost lost art of runesmithing and then being ostracized. That was why he kept babbling about the topic to Ains, who had an interest in the topic like a burst dam. Ains could understand how he felt, because there were times when Ains had also wanted to talk to people who shared his interests. However, Ains was not going along with this long monologue out of the kindness of his heart. Gondo lightly tapped his magic rucksack and began walking away. The Commander-in-Chief seemed to have something to say to the retreating Gondo, but he did not call out to him. Then, what should we do now? Should we wait a while before opening the gate and inspecting the results of the battle? The Commander-in-Chief must have anticipated Ains's question. He replied instantly, as though he had already prepared the answer beforehand. It is deeply disrespectful to have the sovereign of a nation waiting here. I feel we should proceed to the council chamber and present your suggestion to everyone. Why not take a look at the aftermath? I think Your Majesty's introduction is more important. I sent a message to the council while the Quagga were attacking. They are probably still fumbling for some way to deal with the situation now. I feel that we should present them with new information before they panic and give bad orders. I see. In that case, I have no objections. Please, lead on. Understood. However, Your Majesty's magical beasts will surely terrify the common folk. It shames me to ask, but could you have them stand by here? We will take care of them to the best of our ability if you inform us of the key points. Ains looked towards Aura, who nodded. I see. Then they shall wait here. Ains indicated to a corner of the garrison with a bony finger, and the commander nodded in agreement. Also, there is no need to care for them. We will take care of that. I will have 3 of my followers accompany me. Ains selected Shaltir, Aura and Zenberu. He ordered the others to wait here. The commander-in-chief looked somewhat relieved. It would seem he did not want to have the undead strutting through the streets. Then, shall we go? Ah, please do. Ains and company walked proudly through the dwarven city, led by the commander-in-chief. An almost painful amount of curious stares focused on him, while dwarven mothers who saw Ains hid their children indoors. That made him somewhat disappointed. Of course, he could have been less obvious if he wished. If he had put on a mask, much fewer people would have stared at him. That said, there was a reason why he did not choose to cover his face. It was because he wanted to announce his arrival in the city of the dwarves. It was not very likely that there would be a player in the dwarven nations if it had to seek external help against an invasion like this. However, there might be low-level players here, or items they had left behind. Like that spell-sealing crystal. In order to avoid being attacked by such items, he would have to manufacture proof of his visit in an above-board manner. In this way, they would not be able to settle things clandestinely. In addition, while he had not yet decided what sort of ambassadorial party he would send, it was quite likely that he might end up using undead beings for that purpose. Therefore, he wanted to let them get used to it. Still, nobody seems worried, despite the extent of the Quaggoa invasion. Ains asked the commander-in-chief that question after seeing 2 red-faced dwarves stagger out of a tavern, arms around each other's shoulders. The unmistakable scent of alcohol surrounded them. That is because the people do not know the Quaggoa have attacked. And why is that? Their sense of self-preservation appeared to be terminally defective. The commander-in-chief seemed to have read Ains's mind, and he replied. The Quaggoa advanced too quickly, so the information did not spread. Depending on the council's decision, it ought to start spreading within an hour. Well, I did order my subordinates to retake the bridge, so once they do so, the city will be safe for the time being. No. This is quite an important factor for when we began trade with this country. That is hard to say. Given the size of the enemy force, we don't know when the opposition will begin their advance in earnest. Once we take the bridge back, we'll need to solidify our defenses, investigate their flanking route, and plan a strategy against them. Ains smiled evilly within his heart. It looked like there would be many chances to sell this country favors in the future. That being the case, it might be best not to change his Death Knight's orders to retake the bridge. What? Ains's voice set the commander-in-chief's shoulders trembling. What is it, Your Majesty? No, it's nothing. Something on my end. There's no need to worry. There's no need to ask further. Ains emphasized those words in iron tones to shut down the other man's questions. This reaction, which was quite unlike Ains, was because he had lost his composure. There was no response from the 2 Death Knights he had made, which should have been in the vicinity of Fioga. There was only one conclusion he could draw from this shocking conclusion. The Death Knights had been defeated. Death Knights were fairly weak to Ains. However, by the standards of this world, they were formidable opponents even for the most powerful members of a nation. Anyone who could defeat 2 fearsome knights like that must be very powerful. In addition, their responses had vanished at almost the same time. Had they been simultaneously destroyed as part of a carefully laid plan? Had someone finished them off with an area effect spell? Had a powerful individual simply obliterated him in one stroke? Whatever the answer was, there was certainly another mighty being present, apart from the bizarre masked magic caster he had encountered in the royal capital. Someone who could defeat the defense-oriented Death Knights by themselves would probably be over level 45. Does that mean I've been found out? The Commander-in-Chief looked at Ains in response to his mumblings, but Ains had no time to worry about him. An unknown, powerful being was most likely to be a player. If an enemy of Ains's level had come to this world, a measly 2 Death Knights would be child's play to deal with. If there's a player-related entity here who's not connected to the dwarves, does that mean they're on the side of the Quagga? Then, are they related to the people who brainwashed Shaltir? Searing fire blazed up in his chest. Hitherto smoldering embers flared into a raging inferno, as though someone had poured gasoline on them. However, they were swiftly suppressed. No, it's not possible. If they were related, the Dwarven city would have fallen long ago. It's more likely that it's a mighty individual from this world. However, I can't conclude that there's no connection. That being the case, I will need to alter my plans. Ains had originally hoped that the war between the Quagga and the dwarves would go on. With the obvious enemy of the Quagga before them, the dwarves might well choose to flock to Ains's banner. However, leaving the Quagga alone, giving them too much time, would be very dangerous. If they were a race that habitually spawned powerful individuals, then while they might only have slain Death Knights now, who knew what else they would destroy in the future? Right now, while he could still deal with them, the best thing to would be to either enslave them or annihilate them completely. The latter might well be the better course of action. Ideally, I would be able to subjugate the Quagga and have them threaten the dwarves from the shadows, but a single misstep might lead to a fatal error. It would be safer not to do that. Your Majesty, the council chamber is in sight. As he turned to look in the direction where the Commander-in-Chief was pointing, a large building, certainly big for a dwarf, but sizable even by Ains's standards, came into view. The commander spoke briefly with the guards at the door, and they let Ains and the others pass without inspection. The reason why they waived the inspection for Ains and company while still staring unabashedly at the undead Ains was surely because the commander had exercised his authority. Then, Your Majesty, I shall make a full report to the council. May I trouble you to wait here for a while? There was no reason to object. More to the point, it might be troublesome if he did not explain Ains's contribution to this nation. Where shall we wait, then? The Commander-in-Chief glanced to one of the dwarf guards, and the man stepped forward. The waiting room is that way. Permit me to escort you there. Really now? I'll leave that to you, then. The dwarf, who trembled in both body and voice, brought them to a somewhat cramped room. Then again, it would probably not have been cramped for a dwarf. It was just the right size for Aura and Shaltir. However, they had Zenbero there, who was large of stature. Just waiting in the room felt very claustrophobic for him. Given that the soldier had taken a look at Zenbero before bringing him here, this must have been the largest and the most luxurious VIP room in this building. Sure enough, the ornaments around them were all exquisitely crafted and looked as though they might actually move. Ains had once made avatar of his past companions, and he deeply appreciated the difficulty of making such intricate statuary. It was possible for something to look beautiful in profile but ugly when viewed head-on. Ains picked up a statuette, a dwarf riding on the back of a lizard. It's plainly obvious that the dwarves have outstanding craftsmanship. I'd like to have such skills. I wonder if I could remake the avatars. If I could, would I be able to make something better after practicing? Alright. Ains decided to address Zenbero, who seemed distinctly out of place here. Zenbero, continue with us for a bit longer. Your Majesty, I'd like to stay here instead, if it pleases you. Frankly speaking, it gives me a headache to talk with those great people. A strange turn of phrase. It was different from how he had been during the trip here. Perhaps he had changed the way he spoke because he had come to the Dwarven Kingdom. You are the overseer of a tribe, am I correct? Shaltir Sama, one can be good or bad at various things. Also, I would feel bad if inconvenienced His Majesty. Ains understood Zenbaru's meaning, but he shook his head nonetheless. No, I will take you along. If something happens, I won't be able to protect you if you're too far away. I don't think there will actually be any danger, but carelessness is for fools. For all we know, we might be within the palm of the enemy. Remember that at all times. Yes, I have seared it into my heart. Even though Ains did not feel that the dwarves would harm someone who had saved their country, he repeated for safety's sake. What's this? Shaltir's responding pretty well today. Did something happen? Then, Your Majesty. What should I do? Frankly speaking, just listen to us, Zenbaru. No matter what happens, do not take part in any fighting. Ains nodded as Zenbaru indicated his understanding. Very good. Now then, Aura, Shaltir, can you inspect my clothes and see if they're messed up? The dwarven soldier sent to show them the way arrived just after the two of them finished inspecting their attire. Ains was led to a room where the dwarves waited. Resplendent in his full panoply, Ains strode forth with chest up thrust. His back was ramrod straight, his head was held high, and his bearing was that of a king. The obsidian radiance from the aura behind him glowed softly, as a substitute for cologne. Surely nobody would look down on him after all these preparations. He kept the wand which substituted for a royal scepter at his waist. It was infused with a first-tier spell, but since he had no intention of activating it, it should not pose any problems. After looking at himself up and down, he felt that this get-up was somewhat at odds with the objective of seeking friendly relations, but Aura and Shaltir strongly approved of it. The problem was that both of them thought too highly of Ains, so he felt uneasy about relying on their opinion. Thus, he asked Zenbaru for his view on the matter. After some fidgeting from being asked about something which lay outside his field of expertise, Zenbaru finally said something along the lines of, "Your attire would surely inspire awe in anyone who sees it." Ains took his word for it, and came here. However, the dwarves he encountered turned pale, their postures shot through with nervousness. Of course, that too was an appropriate reaction to a king announcing the arrival of His Majesty, the Saucer King. He could hear the dwarf announcer from the other side of the door. When the door opened, Ains entered the chamber. It looked like a meeting room, and there were 8 dwarves there. Incidentally, he had learned their names, their posts, their looks and features from the Commander-in-Chief. There was the High Priest of Earth, who governed everything to do with magic. He held sway over divine magic casters and even arcane magic casters. There was the Forge Master, who controlled all production which derived from the forges. There was the Commander-in-Chief who had brought them here. He was responsible for all security and military matters. Once, he had commanded many dwarven soldiers, but the fact that he only had less than 100 men now made the title a joke. There was the Director of Food Production, who managed food production and other industries which did not concern the forges. There was the Cabinet Secretary, who was in charge of everything which fell outside the jurisdiction of the other leaders here. There was the Brewmaster, who was on this council because there had to be a leadership position for the dwarven people's favorite pastime of alcohol. There was the Master of Caves and Mines, who had a lot of power in this city due to his influence over the sphere of Ming and resource extraction. Once, there had been an organization called the Merchants Guild. But due to the lack of traders and trade in general, the title of Merchants Guild Master was now a hollow position in charge of foreign affairs. Those were the 8 of them. Ains slowly swept his gaze across everyone. 7 of them stared at him. The last one, the commander-in-chief, had a look of fatigue on his face instead, and his eyes met Ains's. Ains was pretending to be the picture of calm, but his heart was in chaos. Oi, I can't even tell them apart. Maybe some of them have shorter beards than the others, but aren't they all pretty much the same length? Was he lying to me? No, that must have been how he saw it. What should I do? Zenbaru's memories had depicted them all with identical faces, and at first Ains thought it was simply because the lizardmen saw all dwarves as the same. He had even felt that Zenbaru's ability to recognize faces needed improvement. However, that was not the case. I'm sorry I doubted you, Zenbaru. You were telling me the truth all along. In this world, there was no practice of exchanging business cards upon a meeting, a fact which he had long lamented. Ains felt the same way today, and then he gathered his strength into his belly. Next would come a presentation which he had already made several times. Of note was the fact that he had 2 guardians behind him and a subordinate of his subordinate. He could not allow them to see him make a fool of himself. If only I hadn't brought the 3 of them. However, his regrets were immaterial. The die had been cast, after all. TL note, Elia Yacta est. Still, while he had psyched himself for it, there was not a single trace of the dialogue starting. The silence remained unbroken for a full minute after his arrival. What's going on? Standard practice for a company would be to start by the host introducing their staff, right? Shouldn't the commander-in-chief introduce us? Or should I make the first move? I'm not too well versed in courtly etiquette and I don't want to appear boorish. According to courtly etiquette, inferiors could not address the king directly. Direct interaction required a permission of some sort. In other words, the king was an untouchable being. Therefore, if Ains initiated the dialogue, would the dwarves look down upon him? After looking at the dwarves, was the answer yes or no? That said, I doubt anyone will slight me, given the country's situation and the actions I took. If that really happens, then I might as well say that I won't negotiate with a pack of buffoons like them. Having made up his mind, Ains decided to make his pitch. I am the ruler of the Sorceress Kingdom, the Saucer King Ains Ulgaun. The dwarves sprang into motion, as though they were reconnected to a power supply. We bid you welcome, Sovereign of the Sorceress Kingdom, Your Majesty Ains Ulgaun. May we offer you a seat? There are seats for your esteemed followers over there. Ains nodded, and then he was ushered to what he called the birthday boy's place. He sat down with regal aplomb, using movements he had practiced over and over. Shaltir, Aura and Zenbaru sat behind Ains. Then, we shall introduce ourselves. Firstly, I am this country's. And so, the dwarves gave their names. The opening seemed to have gone without a hitch, but Ains could not contain his worries. Just keeping their 8 names in mind was already difficult. Having to associate each of those names and titles with a face was proving to be quite the challenge. Names were easy enough to remember, but adding a title onto that made him uneasy. Things like whether it was Master of Caves and Mines or Master of Mines and Caves only made things worse. That said, Ains managed to remember them. He would not have been able to do it had he not inquired about them with the commander-in-chief earlier. Please allow us to thank you on behalf of this country. Without your majesty, this country would have been destroyed. Those words were spoken by the Master of Caves and Mines. All the dwarves present nodded in response. The members of the council apparently took turns leading it, so the leader this time around was the Master of Caves and Mines. Pay it no heed. Saving someone in trouble is common sense. Your Majesty is a truly magnanimous person. We will surely aid you to the best of our ability if any trouble besets you. That said, I fear we cannot do much to aid your august person, who commands the troops that saved our nation from extinction with but 2 of their number. It's nothing like that. My country is indeed powerful in a military sense. However, there are some inadequacies when it comes to other fields. I would be very grateful if you could provide help to me in those aspects. I see. We would be glad to be of service to your Majesty to the Sorceress Kingdom. However, before that, we pray your Majesty will tell us the reason for your visit to our country, if it is convenient. The Commander-in-Chief has already told us, but we would like to hear it directly from you. The Master of Caves and Mines narrowed his eyes slightly. We'll see through any lies. His unyielding determination was palpable. I can't expect them all to feel goodwill towards me. Well, given the difference in power between our nations, anyone would be cautious. The same applied to Ains. If the top-ranked guild in YGGDRASIL Seraphim offered a world-class item and asked to negotiate, Ains would also suspect some kind of a trap. Therefore, he was not displeased with the dwarves' reaction. Firstly, I would like to initiate friendly relations between our nations. Then, I would like to engage in trade. Is that so? I have heard from one of your countrymen that your staple foods are mushrooms and meat. Am I wrong? I recall something about farms at the feet of the mountain which raise fresh vegetables, but apparently they are few in number and their variety is quite poor. My nation can supply fresh vegetables and do the alcoholic spirits of human kingdoms and the sorceress kingdom hold any interest for you? The topic of alcohol made the dwarves' eyes light up. That was a very frank reaction. I also hear that this country trades with the human nation to the east, but not to any great degree. Indeed, our traffic is merely 20 dwarves worth of merchandise. Currently, we are developing magic items which can hold an unlimited supply of goods. The Merchants Guild Master gave that reply. I see. Is it true that there are few dwarven trade caravans due to the dangerous mountain roads? That is indeed the case. Another dwarf supplied that answer. We cannot carry too many goods due to the steepness and danger of the mountain paths. In addition, moving in groups draws the monsters' attention. There are many monsters which will attack regardless of the numbers of their prey. In particular, aerial ambushes are hard to deal with. It was true that conventional trading methods would require great effort. The Empire only engaged in limited trade with the dwarves due to the lack of profit in doing so. However, it was precisely that reason which made him a very lucrative trading partner for the Sorceress Kingdom. Unfortunately, the only notable export which the Sorceress Kingdom could boast was their undead. However, to the Dwarven nation, even regular food would sell well. What a marvelous trading partner! Ains smiled evilly in his heart as he asked his question. If that is the case, then I must further recommend national relations with me with the Sorceress Kingdom, so we can export foodstuffs. We have not yet inquired of the precise location of the Sorceress Kingdom. Can we transport our trade goods there by ourselves? Having your country's people move cargo by themselves would still be quite dangerous. I feel that my nation should take the lead in establishing a proper trade route so your nation's people can safely transport their wares. When that happens, wagons and carriages will be able to move smoothly. Of course, they will not be pulled by anything as fragile as horses but by other beasts of burden. Could those be the undead? One of the dwarves, his face filled with disgust, asked that question. Ains recalled that he was apparently the Forge Master. Precisely. I propose the use of undead pulled cargo wagons, which possess the power to defend themselves and will never tire. They will surely make for excellent transportation tools. In truth, our nation has already made use of them, and the response from the citizens is very good. In addition, there are other advantages to using the undead. Just as Ains was about to launch into an enthusiastic presentation, the Forge Master interrupted him. Is it not true that the undead will attack the living? Ains pouted internally, but he responded with supreme confidence. It is true that many people would think that way about an average undead being. And to be fair, it is true. The undead are beings which hate and attack the living. However, Ains placed particular emphasis on that word. Under my absolute authority, the undead of the Sorceress Kingdom will not pose any problems for you. You may rest easy knowing that. The Forge Master's mouth pursed into a he shape. He did not seem to believe Ains at all. He must have had a bad experience where the undead slew his family, or something. As Ains contemplated that possibility, he played one of his trump cards. In addition, my nation can supply labor. During my journey, I spoke with one of your countrymen whom I saved from the quagga. Ains had not done so on purpose, but it was not a complete accident, so he decided to phrase it as doing him a favor. And I heard of the work that goes on in your country's mines. While it is work for dwarven miners, the undead can handle it for you. What? Can they really do that? The eyes of the Master of Caves and Mines went wide, having taken the bait. Of course. I have conducted this experiment in human nations, and it was successful. In fact, the owner of the mines who rented them even requested for additional undead miners. He had heard about this from Albedo when he had sent her a worried message, so it was not a lie. So you've done that sort of thing in human nations? The Master of Mines and Caves muttered as though in awe. It would seem your country is familiar with the special characteristics of the undead. Well, we know about their more common traits. Ains raised his voice to address the High Priest of Earth. Then, I trust I need not elaborate on how the undead make for excellent laborers. The dwarves exchanged looks, and then began speaking one after the other. Your Majesty's words are understandable. If we could safely control the undead, being able to reallocate the manpower assigned to Ming is a very attractive proposal. However, would probably be followed by doubts about whether they could really trust the undead. It was natural they would feel conflicted about a method that was different from how they had done things until now. Ultimately, this was merely publicity for his firm's products, and not a serious attempt to close a sale. Of course, if they could accept undead labor, it would certainly delight him. Well, I merely meant to say that I could provide such laborers. I understand your unease towards the undead. Your Majesty, I would like to ask a question about the undead before that. Could we purchase them as a defensive force? The Commander-in-Chief's question sent ructions through the dwarves. Commander-in-Chief, it is too risky to rely on the military power of other nations to keep the peace. I know that. However, the undead of the Sorceress Kingdom are extremely powerful. With them around, we have no need to fear any quagga attack. There are many benefits to purchasing them as a final defensive line. The most important thing, the thing we must all consider, is the safety of our nation. Now that we have lost our fortress, we need power, more than anything else. Even so, don't you think it's more dangerous to have the hands of another nation around our throats? I told you, now isn't the time to talk about that sort of thing. The Forge Master and the Commander-in-Chief glared at each other. We'll leave it as that. Those words will be saved for when it's only us. This is not something we should be saying in front of His Majesty, who came all the way here from his kingdom. Forgive this gaffe, Your Majesty. This conflict was caused by the attractive nature of your Majesty's proposals, and we would be very grateful if you could permit it to pass unnoticed. Then, may I know what your Majesty desires from this country? I feel that we have practically nothing to offer. Certainly not. First, I desire ores. My country's stockpiles are limited. I see. The Merchants Guild master smiled. So that's why you suggested undead labor. If we could excavate minerals in large quantities, then there would be an ample surplus. In other words, you want to keep the price of ores low. Is that it? Ains had not thought that far ahead, but Ains nodded and pretended that it was the case. Indeed it is so. You have seen through me. No wonder, the dwarves thought as understanding dawned on them. Also, I would like the weapons and armor crafted by the forgers of your nation. I hear that dwarven battle equipment is of exemplary quality. All the people Ains had asked about this topic agreed that this was an unassailable fact. However, processed weapons and armor were more expensive. If they bought from the dwarves, then there would be fewer armorsmiths and weaponsmiths in the Sorceress Kingdom. If there was a clear technological difference between the two countries, it would be better to improve the technology of one's own nation rather than take the foolish action of buying large quantities of superior arms and armor. However, if there was no competition, the smiths within the Sorceress Kingdom would not hone their skills. The weapons and armor purchased from the dwarves might serve as a positive stimulus for that. Of course, there were many ways to handle this, such as by collecting tariffs and the like. One had to ensure that he could make a profit off the dwarves and not constantly import from them, among other headaches. The simple answer would be to hand all this to Albedo and Demiurge. However, Ains had his own considerations as well. His plan was to limit sales to the newly founded Adventurers Guild, or rent him to adventurers. Low prices were very attractive to adventurers, and keeping him alive would also benefit the Sorceress Kingdom. If they could sell old goods at low prices, they might be able to increase the survival rates of adventurers at the same time. While we have not thanked your Majesty for sharing all this with us, these are questions which cannot be answered immediately, in particular on the matter of war gear. Could you give us some time to discuss this? Of course. Discuss until you reach a conclusion. I will not be upset even if we cannot begin trade immediately. My own subordinates are already equipped with high-end gear. I merely wish to acquire arms and armor for my people. All right, Ains thought. This was the crucial moment. It was time to complete his objective for coming to this city. Shall we discuss the matter of the quagga? Tension immediately filled the air. The response to the Quagga invasion was merely a personal decision. Is that correct, Commander-in-Chief? Indeed. However, what would have happened if I was not around? If your Majesty had not been around, we would have had to rely on a single gate to block the enemy advance. Once the gate was breached, we would have need to mobilize the citizens to engage in a decisive battle within the city in order to buy time for the children to flee. Imagine that would have been the case. The dwarves all had bitter expressions on their faces. Perhaps it was due to the Commander-in-Chief's earlier report, but the utter absence of objections or counter-arguments spoke of the excellence of everyone here. There was nobody present who was driven by idealism, emotion or personal gain. If there was anyone like that here, particularly if they possessed authority or influence, they would waste time pointlessly before even the basics were completed, chattering away until the meeting was concluded. The fact that there was nobody like that here was worthy of praise. Then, please explain to me in more detail. What would this decisive battle entail? It is difficult to answer because we do not know the enemy's full battle strength. However, assuming there were 1,000 Quagga, we would be in dire straits. Repelling him would be very difficult, and all we would accomplish would be to weaken our nation due to the loss of resources and manpower. Why did it end up this way? The commander-in-chief muttered. It was probably because the fortress at the Great Rift was too strong. The dwarves had grown arrogant, believing, "It'll be okay as long as we have it." Ains felt this way as well. He had tasted the bitter fruit of carelessness in the form of Shaltir. If we have only one ace in the hole, when it is defeated, then we're undone. Thus, I feel we need another trump card, in the form of your Majesty's power. Ains raised his hand to silence the dwarves, who seemed about to speak. The commander-in-chief might have seized the reins of the conversation, but Ains was not done speaking yet. The Quagga have been repulsed for the time being, but Fioga is not yet at peace. That is my opinion. The expressions on the dwarves' faces were universally sour. After making sure that everyone was fully aware of his prior point, Ains decided to seize the moment and speak. Without me, it will be very difficult to repulse the next Quagga invasion. Even for someone like me, the destruction of a nation which I am about to begin trade with would be quite troublesome. What do you think? Will you not make use of my strength? Given the power of my nation, I can guarantee that your nation will not be attacked for a time. Yes. For instance, I could help in taking back the Quagga Nest, the former dwarven capital, I believe. The air seemed to shudder. This was an entirely new reaction. The master of caves and mines licked his lips. Your Majesty, do you mean that such a thing would be possible? If I prepare for it, of course. The Forge Master folded his arms before him and glared at Ains. That seems far too idealistic. Why are you giving us so much help? What do you want from us? Oi, you've said too much. The Forge Master snorted at his colleague's words. It's like waving a bottle of fine wine in front of a stranger. Do you really think there are no strings attached? NGG. A reasonable question. Then let me be frank with you. One of the reasons is because I believe it is better to establish diplomatic relations with your country than the Quagga. I believe that you gentlemen of this fine country understand the concepts of common sense and indebtedness, and that you owe me a certain debt of gratitude. Now consider a side which is about to win, and a side which is about to lose. Who will be more grateful if I lend them my strength? That is the case. In addition, I would like this debt to be paid not in words but in a material fashion. This leads to another reason. I see, so it's about payment. Then, do you want gold, or rare metals, or exotic ores? Or do you want Ming rights as well? Of course. Ains wanted to say that, but he swallowed those words and resisted the urge to speak them. No, I want something different. I want to recruit the runesmiths of this country to my nation. The dwarves blinked as one. What? Is that so hard to understand? Question mark. The Forge Master frowned more deeply than the others. It is because runic arms and armor are very rare in the nations surrounding the Sorceress Kingdom. I find them to be very valuable articles. In other words, they are very valuable. Therefore, I thought of recruiting runesmiths and having them produce rune-crafted war gear in my nation. Will you take them as slaves? Ains sighed with exaggerated loudness at the Forge Master. I will do nothing of the sort. Did you not hear me speak? I said I wanted to open international ties and begin trade, did I not? Do you actually think I would take the people of such a partner nation as slaves? Frankly speaking, I'm a little disappointed. All I had in mind was recruiting runesmiths and having them make runic equipment in my country. In that case, what if we gave you top priority on the sales of rune-crafted gear? No. It would not be worth the investment. If you wish to use my strength, then you must let the runesmiths work in the Sorceress Kingdom and allow us to form a monopoly on the sale of their products. That is what my nation wants, and it is the price of taking back your former capital. When can you give me an answer?" The dwarves looked at each other. "I see. Perhaps tomorrow." "That might be a little troublesome," interjected the commander-in-chief. "Don't forget this city is still in danger of being attacked by the Quagga. Even if His Majesty accepts the task of defeating the Quagga, it will take time for him to gather his troops. With that point in mind, we cannot wait until tomorrow. We should give him an answer right away." Ains looked over the dwarves. "It is not my place to speak here. However, if you are truly in such dire straits, then having me fulfill my earlier promises will also be quite troublesome. If the situation becomes very bad, then I will have to add several more conditions. After all, one must expect to pay more for last-minute work." The commander-in-chief is right, and your Majesty's words are also very sensible. Then, Your Majesty, while we apologize for the imposition, can you wait for us in the room from just now? We would like to reach a conclusion as quickly as possible. I have no objections to that. I shall wait there, then. With that, Ains rose, and left the room in the company of his subordinates. The room was still veiled in silence even after the departure of the Saucer King. Shortly after, somebody exhaled, and that dispersed the tension that hung in the air. What the hell was that? That was an unbelievable monster. Commander-in-Chief, that monster made my hair stand on end. There's no doubt about the fear he commands. I almost thought I was going to piss myself. The dwarves all began shouting. They poured out all the things their strained nerves had been holding in check. What should we do? He's evil incarnate. If even a single thing of what he said is true, it would scare the hell out of me. How could anyone radiating such an evil light be benevolent? Look at him. How many of the living do you think he's murdered up till now? He must have taken so many lives he can't even remember them all. And to think that spine-chilling face could actually utter such normal-sounding words. He must be gathering equipment for some great invasion. For his army of darkness. Also, I hate how he's so easy to understand and agree with. He feels just like those devils who steal souls with contracts. They were unanimous in rejecting the Saucer King's proposal. Many of them agreed that the words of the undead could not be trusted. However, His Majesty's proposal is very attractive to our country. In the first place, our country will be destroyed if we don't do something about the Quagga. In addition, the Saucer King is the only person who can save us. The commander-in-chief was the sole voice of opposition. His words made the other dwarves look like they had chewed a bitter worm. Let me make sure again. Is there no way we can deal with the Quagga with our strength alone? There's no way. With the help of the Saucer King we might be able to take the fortress back, but there are far too many things we need to do. Right now, all we can hope for is to take the fortress back. Had His Majesty not come here, the Quagga might be flooding into the city by now. If the Saucer King spoke the truth, then there were sightings of Quagga in Fio Rido as well. The dwarves clutched their heads. What if we just borrowed the Saucer King's power and then pretended that we knew nothing about it? That would only aggravate that monster. Even I would be unhappy in his position. After all, we'd be the people who only cared about borrowing military power for our own gain and whatnot. Still, the timing for this is just too much of a coincidence. Could the Saucer King be pulling the strings behind the scenes? It's quite likely, but we have no proof. All we can do is guess. The important thing here is that the Saucer King chose us and not the Quagga. If we displease him, we'll be putting a noose around our own necks. Trying to investigate him would also be very dangerous. Does the Saucer King drink? Do you think he can? I guess you can't trust a guy who doesn't drink, after all. Still, Here the hitherto silent Merchants Guild master spoke up. I believe we can all accept what the Saucer King is saying. It makes perfect sense. I'd do the same in his position, picking the dwarves over the Quagga. If he commanded an army which could easily annihilate the Quagga, then helping the Quagga kill the dwarves would not offer him a lot of benefits. He said he wanted to lend undead workers to us. Wouldn't taking the mines for his own be more profitable? Well, there would be no point in taking us as slaves. Besides, we know the mountain, don't we? I see. That's very likely. He feels that exploring the mines by himself would be very troublesome, so he'll let us excavate the ores. So he'll give us a pretty collar to please us, then. Still, after talking to the Saucer King, I get the feeling that everything will be alright as long as we trade with him. In other words, he doesn't intend to exploit us with uneven trade deals. In that case, I can understand why he's offering such generous terms. Still, wouldn't it be alright to agree to his proposal? Why do you say that? Because we can help each other. As long as the Saucer King wants us, he will protect us. We can think of the Saucer King as a mercenary with a huge appetite for wine, in that sense. The general opinion had shifted from dealing with him is dangerous to we'll be safe as long as we have value. However, during the course of this change, one dwarf spoke coldly. Do you all intend to be the minions of that undead creature? All eyes turned to the man who had been staunchly opposed to Ains since the beginning, the Forge Master. It's not a question of good or evil. Right now, our country is in a crisis of survival. If we don't do something about the Quagga, we'll be destroyed for sure. And our strength alone cannot defeat the Quagga. Then, how about asking the Empire for help? We've had dealings with them for many years. Wouldn't that be safer? We don't know anything about the Sorceress Kingdom, you know. Even if we asked the Empire for help, they'd have no chance against the Quagga. They're very tough foes for anyone who uses a weapon. The most important thing is that humans can't see in the dark and they're not suitable for underground combat. While they might have a chance if we could lure them to the surface, we have no way of doing so. Then it seems dealing with the Sorceress Kingdom is our only option. In any case, we'll start by asking for help, and leave the trade deals for after we've seen the Sorceress Kingdom. What do you think? That might be the safest way of doing it. Still, we're doing business with them to defeat the Quagga, right? Then, if we don't make a deal with them, we'll need to pay for services rendered, won't we? I don't even want to think about what kind of price one can put on saving a country. The dwarves were all sour-faced. I guess the only way to save the country is to accept his proposal. That means we'll have to rely on the Saucer King's strength for the next few decades. Amidst the murmurs of agreement, the Master of Caves and Mines muttered something along the lines of, using undead labor means that they can keep going for all those decades, but nobody paid too much attention to him. That was because there was another pronouncement which seized their ears. You seem to have forgotten something important. I oppose this. I will never let our people go and be his slaves. Slaves. The runesmiths. The Saucer King already said they would not be slaves, no. Really? Do you really believe what he says? Thus rebuked, the dwarf who asked lowered his head. Oi, look. We can't rule that out. Even if everything the Saucer King stated was fact, anyone who knew the undead hated the living would not be able to believe it. Hostages, then? No. There'd be no need for him to specify runesmiths, in that case. He could just as easily have stated demands for our family members instead. Then, can we refuse the matter of the runesmiths but ask if anything else would serve as payment? Are there any treasures which might change his mind? No. Although, if we take back the capital and if the treasury is intact, we might be able to pay him with its contents. No, he won't accept that. We'll need his strength to take back the royal capital, right? If we give it to him under that, what will we say when he asks us, did you take these treasures from the vaults of the city I took back for you? Do you think it would be a good deal if you were in his shoes? Frankly speaking, I think it would be fine if we just accepted all his terms. The Forge Master glared at the Merchants Guild Master. Slaves. That's just your opinion. The Saucer King has already said he won't take them as slaves. All we need to do is send people over to make sure of that, right? And most importantly, while this might seem a bit much, runecraft is an outdated technology. Considering it might vanish at any moment, I don't think it'll be a problem to hand it over. Pretty cheap for what we're getting, right? But we'll lose that entire branch of our craft, don't you think? Still, now's the best time to sell it, right? I oppose it. Bubbles formed at the edge of the Forge Master's mouth as he shouted. Is that the result of logic, and not emotions? Doesn't look that way to me. I have no idea why you all have so much trust in the Saucer King. At this point, the Commander-in-Chief spoke in cold tones. Having faced the Quagga in battle, he knew the situation of this city better than anyone else. Therefore, he did not wish to waste words in useless conversation and had stood aside as an observer, but he had finally reached his limit. Trust aside, this city will assuredly be destroyed if we do not borrow the strength of the Saucer King. What you're doing is casting aside the single lifeline that we have. What did you say, whippersnapper? I'm in charge of this city's military. And I say that the only way we can protect the city is with His Majesty's power. Do you want to destroy this city? Otherwise, give me a way to beat the Quagga without using his strength. You old relic. You've been calling that monster His Majesty ever since you stepped into this room. Have you betrayed this country? The Forge Master grabbed the Commander-in-Chief by the lapels. What bullshit is that, you addled old fool? You want to fight? It's only natural to refer to someone with such power with terms of respect. You're the ones who can't be trusted. He could easily annihilate this country, you know. If you say I betrayed this nation, then you lot are jeopardizing the safety of the people. The Commander-in-Chief seized the Forge Master by the collar as well, and their foreheads collided. Oi, it's one thing to disagree, but don't fight. The other dwarves hurriedly rose to separate the pair. However, the two of them still glared at each other, as though they were getting ready for round two. In any case, let's take a vote. If anyone disagrees, we'll discuss it later. It'll be more constructive than a fistfight. What's the vote about? First, whether we will let the runesmiths go to the Sorceress Kingdom in order to make use of the Saucer King's power. All in favor, raise your hand. Everyone except the Forge Master raise their hands. Then, the next item. Do we want to forge relations with the Sorceress Kingdom and begin trade? All in favor, raise your hand. The outcome was the same as before. I see. Then, the vote concerning the Saucer King His Majesty is decided. Sorry, Commander-in-Chief, but you can call His Majesty back now.